Do Ghanaian films have the potential to be classics like the way The Godfather and the other films are celebrated much today? And today I'll be just sharing my thoughts on why perhaps this is the reason why we need to learn from the masters, not just our own Ghanaian masters who are alive and perhaps have passed on from their films, but also that of the filmmakers from all over the continent and even beyond. And why perhaps we need to be a student of film to make such an impact on the world stage. And then moving on from that to Denzel Washington, he has expressed one of his regrets for not accepting a role that could have changed his film, already illustrious film career, onto another level altogether. We're taking a look at what this film is and look at some of the thoughts he expressed with regards to such for regards to missing out on this opportunity. So this and more is what we'll be talking about on the film mandate right here on YouTube. I'm Papa Otu. Stay tuned. Welcome back to another exciting episode of the Film Mandate, where I bring to you movie news, reviews, and reactions both from the African front and the international scene. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you for joining me for this particular episode, episode 52. So, in today's episode, I just want to express my thoughts on why perhaps we need to learn from the masters and to be able to create films that could stand the test of time and also be celebrated as classics, in the stratosphere of filmmaking, so to speak. And so I had opportunity of going to the African Film Society setup or office that is at on the Legon Road. Unfortunately, I didn't really pick up any images yet to present because of the time. I didn't have enough time to spend there, but I'll be doing so in a later date. But then there's a setup done by Blitz Bazawule, the director of the Color Purple musical, and also the Ghanaian, I would say, phenom movie, The Burial of Kojo, which won the hearts of a lot of Ghanaians and those abroad. That film indeed was directed with such artistic eye that made it quite exceptional. Perhaps maybe one of the standouts of a film, of an art house film that may not have been replicated in Ghana ever before because of some of the symbolism of things that he presented in the film. And I realized that when you enter into this setup facility that he has collected a number of African film greats whose films are displayed all over there in DVDs, even LPs or vinyls that contain some of the soundtracks of films, not just of African filmmakers, but some of the Black American film greats like Spike Lee. We even had Black Panther and all that, and it kept me wondering because I remember seeing a particular film there and up to date, even though I must admit I haven't watched exhaustively all African films, if I'm to just limit the scope to African films, or even all Ghanaian films to be specific, to perhaps draw this conclusion. But I still drew the conclusion, or have drawn the conclusion, that it perhaps has one of the greatest opening scene ever found in a Ghanaian film. I'm not going to say that it's not possible for us to have another film to beat that. But as it stands now, from what I've noticed, is perhaps the best opening scene ever in any Ghanaian film that exists today, or if I'm going to be fair, that I've ever watched. And this film is Kukurantumi, Road to Accra, directed by Ken Ampao. And why do I say that this film the opening of the film is one of the greatest or the greatest opening ever in a Ghanaian film. I say that on the grounds that first and foremost, this film was made in the 19 it was made in 1983, and at the time technology has evolved within that scope of time, befitting of that era. I don't know whether in that era they had all the facilities or the technology necessary to produce films in Ghana, just as perhaps it was found in Europe and other places. But then what struck me particularly about this opening is the fact that this opening was shot for 5 minutes without a cut, not a single cut, and it was done so well that the shots were not boring. Why do I say shots? I say shots even though it's one long shot without a single cut, due to the fact that it kept on changing, framing, framing of the characters in the scene, and it was so dynamic to the extent that even though your mind couldn't register that, or maybe you might even forget that this is one long take, you begin to feel as if it's a series of shots sort of edited together. But then you realize that no, it's just a single take, but they keep changing image sizes to keep the story dynamic. And the amazing thing is that they used the crane. They use the crane, and this is not just an ordinary crane as we find today, where it is mainly just a crane with the camera at the end of the crane itself, and it will be moving about or operated by a grip. But I'm talking about a crane where you had the cameraman seated at the end of the arm, where he is operating the camera, and then at the very far end is a grip person helping to make them that movement possible. And so when I watched this, I was marveled because they used this single crane to take a shot for 5 minutes non-stop of an entire lorry station, and yet be able to capture the conversations among characters, from one main character walking from one end of the station to meet his mates, or what would I say, maybe his assistant, so this person walking from that end of the lorry station to the vehicle is a commercial driver, and then he's assisted by someone that we usually call mate in our local parlance. And for every movement that was captured in there, it was framed so perfectly that you even forget that this is one long take. And it was done so expertly that after even the conversations and everything, and the vehicle had to drive off into the distance, the crane shot kept changing or followed them till it had a wide angle shot, which perhaps we would have used the drone to capture. Yet in that era, they used just this crane to capture the essence of whatever activity they wanted to portray, or actions they wanted to portray within that setting, and it was done so expertly. And it's one of the most beautiful opening scenes ever in a Ghanaian movie, in terms of cinematography. And I must say that this was done so well, it's so captivating. Most often, when you watch it for the first time, maybe you may not pay attention, but it was done so well and it was so captivating that you kept for those who are film fans or film enthusiasts, you really wonder, you marvel at the shot, and it's so amazing. And I must say that ever since that era till now, yes, there have been filmmakers who have done exceptional movies. And I must say, it's not just Kim Ampao of that olden era that has done such marvelous works, but you also have Kwawansan, whose stories are impeccable. You have Love Brood and African Port, and you have Heritage Africa, and you have other filmmakers who have done exceptional jobs, but it looks like their stories and their the excellence with which they executed some of these films in time past are so superior than what we have today. Even in other places around the world, like you have Hollywood, they themselves could acknowledge the fact that the filmmakers of old films are far more superior to the films of today. And granted, there are still some individuals in today's era whose films are exceptional. But then, if you check the the stories, or if you listen to them speak, all these individual filmmakers always borrow from the minds of the filmmakers of old. So you have them talking about Akira Kurosawa, talking about John Ford, talking about Stanley Kubrick, and they keep mentioning their names because their works have become phenomenal. Their works have become so phenomenal that it looks like none would be able to replicate it in this day and age. But granted, I think it's possible. But then it would take the new generation to want to really understand why their works were so exceptional that their films are classic today. Today we have the 2001 Odyssey, which has become more or less like a blueprint, influencing a lot of sci-fi space travel films. You also have films like The Godfather by Coppola, Francis Coppola, whose film has influenced a lot of crime thriller or crime drama films today. You know, you have Akira Kurosawa doing the Seventh Samurai, whose films have been adapted and retold in different genres and in different cultures. That it's so amazing that it looks so fresh, yet you could tell that it's borrowed from the classics of Akira Kurosawa and so many more. You have the Spielbergs doing his movie, and Spielberg himself and Martin Scorsese and all others admit that they have borrowed mightily from the greats of filmmakers in time past. The question is that what are we doing as Ghanaian filmmakers of this era, of the post-pandemic era? Are we just telling stories because we need to tell something, which is good? We need to tell our stories, but what are we learning from those of old? The things they were able to do and achieve, even with the little facilities they had, or very expensive because they couldn't afford it, and yet achieve such films that most of our films today cannot compare to them in terms of quality. Yes, we have the digital cameras today, we have all the facilities to produce crisp images and all that. But in terms of technicality, storytelling, and all other places, they far outpace us. They far outpace us. I feel like it's about time that filmmakers of today go back to the drawing board for whatever film that you want to do. You need to go back to the drawing board and glean from the films of the masters of old. You have even Ran Coogler. One of the reasons why Ran Coogler's films are so outstanding is that he really borrows a lot from those who have come before him. So his movie Sinners became a phenom because he actually didn't just write a story, but in writing the story, he learned from the techniques and some of the elements that were in the films of like Quentin Tarantino's Pulp Fiction, and even people who watched the film could glean from the stories of Ducks to Dawn. I mean, you could glean from several stories all rolled into one. Yes, you would want to be authentic, granted, but you could also borrow inspirations for films that can help, make your film very unique. And for what he did, it made his movie so unique that today he's been named as one of the greats, perhaps not among the top high rank filmmakers, but he's one to be looked at, looking at the fact that all four films that he has done, from Fruitvale Station to Black Panther, Creed, and then Black Panther 2, all have been phenomenal hits prior to the Sinners. Critically acclaimed, he's always had one of the best reviewed films by both critics and the general audiences alike. and his films today are ranked among some of the best. Yes, he's still evolving in his storytelling phase, but he's going to get there obviously. And these are young chaps who are learning so well or so much from those who are ahead of them, even though he has come up with his own style of filmmaking or storytelling in terms of filmmaking, but yet still recognize the power and the dexterity with which the filmmakers of old were able to tell their stories. And I think that for us to be able to produce quality films that would rub shoulders, that would stand be a classic on the world stage, we need to go back to the past. Whilst we are evolving our own styles in today's era, we can still go back and learn from those of old, from the filmmakers of old, not just in Ghana but across Africa, how they were able to tell such compelling films, even with the scarce resources they had at the time. Because the world has become so closely knit and a global village to the extent that if you make a film today, your own people may not even watch it because there comes from Hollywood or from Europe all those big blockbuster films that are just grabbing people's attention and then taking away the shine that is supposed to go on the African film. Granted, there are certain things that ought to be put in place to help our film stand out from the massive lots that comes onto our shores. But beyond that, our stories ought to be told well. Our stories ought to be told better, even than from the better than the masters of film from the times of old. We need to do it better. We need to tell it better. When you watch the opening scene of Kukurantumi, you are marveled as to how they were able to do the camera choreography and to sync with the acting, the actors blocking and movement to work so perfectly well. So work so perfectly well and was done adeptly. I don't know the number of times that shot was taken, but it was done so well and it was so seamless. Even though you had, I wouldn't say they were necessarily cast as extras, but the people who were in the scene, even though you could see one or two looking in the way of the camera, it was done so well that you don't even feel them doing so. And these are lessons that we can learn from the masters of old. Fortunately, King Ampal is still alive today, and the Kwansens are still alive. Reverend Chris Hesse is still alive. We can go back to all these folks and learn from them because they have shown us a way to make sure that our films can be better. They have built a foundation that we can stand on their shoulders to go further. And that is what we ought to do. That is what we ought to do. Our stories should be better, but in terms of crafting the film itself, it ought to be more superior than they have done in the past. So I thought I could just express my thoughts on this because whether we like it or not, our films are not hitting with such impact that we want it to hit. Granted, there are other factors involved that mitigate that reach that we want to get to. But beyond that, are we telling it right technically? Are we telling it right when we are putting it together, when we are shooting it, and all that? Those are the things we need to look at. We need to go back to the masters and learn from them, from their films if they are not alive, and when they are alive, from their films, and also sitting down and talking to them and tapping from that vast knowledge that they have. Yeah, so this sums up my first story. But moving on from that, we go to Hollywood, where Denzel Washington. But before then, maybe let me just, for those who don't know much about the road to Kukurantumi, let me just read the synopsis of it briefly, and then I'll move to the story. So, so on the IMDb page, Kukurantumi, this is the summary of the story. It says that Ade is a lorry driver and an industrious family man who makes ends meet by plying his trade between Accra, the capital city, and his village, Kukurantumi. After losing his job for reasons beyond his control, he plots a marriage between his daughter Abena and an affluent businessman, but she refuses the union because she loves another. Abena disobeys her father Ade, and with Bob, the poor young man she loves, elopes to Accra, where things worsen. So this is just a basic summary of what the plot is about. So you can go and check it out. If you want to watch some of these films, you can go to the Africa Film Society, which is around the uh, I think Ghana Standard Board on the Legon Road, to watch these films. They have not paid me to do any endorsements whatsoever. I myself would be actually registering so that I can go and watch some of these films. That some of the films of these film greats, filmmakers. You know, these great filmmakers that I'm talking about here. So maybe at a later time, I will list a number of these film greats from Africa and the films that they have done. So moving on to my second story, just as I said, Denzel Washington. Sorry, I just so yeah, sorry, I clicked on the wrong button today. So moving on from that to my second story, Denzel Washington has expressed regret to one story that he wished that he never gave up. And for me, I'm even a little surprised because when we look at Denzel Washington, we wonder how possible that could be that his film, I mean, he would have a regret because he has built such an illustrious career spanning decades and he's been successful. Perhaps not as massively successful as maybe some of his counterparts in terms of box office receipts, but in terms of critical acclaim, he's always delivered. I mean, like no other black film actor that has existed. Even Sidney Poitier, who is one of the greats of all time, um, some would argue that Denzel still, inches above what he has achieved. So let's just read this article, which was published in 3DVF, that speaks about how much Denzel feel he's messed up with regards to I don't know why this thing keeps coming up, but pardon me. I think I wish I could read the. Yeah, so let me just quickly sort this out. And then, yeah, okay, so yeah, so now I have access to watch this. Advertisement keeps happening. Anyway, so this is written by Clemente Pesos on May 31st, and it reads that Denzel Washington admits regretting a huge role. I messed it up. So Denzel Washington, the name alone evokes a pantheon of iconic roles that have marked generations. But behind the spotlights and accolades, even Hollywood giants face moments of doubt and crucial decisions. Recently, the actor opened up about an opportunity he let slip away, a choice that, in hindsight, seems to haunt the backstage of his illustrious career. What is this decision that could have reshaped the landscape of his already impressive filmography? Now let's move on. So this is about the film Seven, and he says that when Denzel Washington said no to Seven, sometimes even the greatest artists make choices they deeply regret. This is the case for Denzel Washington, one of the most talented and respected actors in Hollywood. The actor recently revealed that he turned down a role in David Fincher's iconic thriller Seven: The Seven Deadly Sins. This refusal, which he now considers a strategic mistake, marked a turning point in his career. But what motivated such a decision? A scenario deemed too dark. In 1995, David Fincher was looking to bring to life a bold and immersive thriller, and he had Denzel Washington in mind to portray Detective David Mills. However, the actor, after reading the script, felt that the story was too dark and brutal for him. Denzel later explained that he thought the film did not fit his image or artistic choices at the time. He stated, I didn't think it was for me back then. This choice, while understandable in its context, eventually opened the door to another star. And he's referring to Brad Pitt. So for those who have watched David Fincher's crime thriller, Seven, it stars Brad Pitt as a young, hothead detective Mills, playing against the veteran um, veteran, delusioned detective that is Somerset, which is a character played by uh, Morgan Freeman. And in this story, just as a little have been revealed, they they investigate an issue that has to do with a murderer killing people who seem to have committed the seven deadly sins, so to speak. I mean, by his own estimations, and wanted to be to garner the attention of the public. So at the time when this was written, a lot of filmmakers had to pass it on. And one such filmmaker, which I believe was the first person perhaps David Fincher had in mind, was Denzel Washington. And at the time, he thought it was too dark for the kind of films or branding that he's looking at doing. And he missed this opportunity because this opportunity became so iconic for Brad Pitt in particular. And that was the role Denzel was going to play opposite Morgan Freeman. And he gave it up, but this film actually changed the trajectory of the career of Brad Pitt, making him making people realize that he had range and not just the heartthrob kind of character of romantic films that he plays. I mean, so Hollywood or filmmaking in a sense can stereotype you if you are really good in one particular kind of role. And so Brad Pitt, not wanting to keep going back to all those kinds of stories, decided to break away and do this film. And most importantly to him, to keep the ending of the film where it was so grievous or very dark than films that are have been made around the time or perhaps prior. So Denzel missed this opportunity, but it opened, a big opportunity for Brad Pitt, and Brad Pitt became a household name, an actor who is known to have such range and to be able to bring such nuances to a role that haven't been seen before in him, and in particular for a crime thriller of this nature. So this film became a phenomenal. Obviously at the time most people didn't even think it was going to be a hit, and the testing of the film itself didn't go well. I mean, testing of the film with audiences didn't really go well, and the studios were a little shaky about it, whether it's going to be a hit or not. By David Fincher, the director, stood his ground, same as the writer, and who is, I think, something Walker, and you had Brad Pitt also standing his ground that the ending, he doesn't want the ending changed. It will interest you to know that Walker had to create 13 drafts after the original script. After the original script, he didn't want to change the original script, but because he also wanted to work, and at the time the film was with a different studio, so he decided to create these drafts, and he wrote 13 of them. But eventually they still went back to the original script that was penned, and Brad Pitt was so much in love with it, and David Fincher also wanted to stick with it so much that all they had to do was just refine it and make it much tighter. But none of the original concept in the original script was altered. And now David Fincher's film Seven has become one of the a cult classic, influencing a lot of crime thriller that we watch on our screens today. So this is what Denzel was. I mean, has expressed regret to, knowing that if he had done this, it would have shot him into the limelight of a career that would have been far perhaps bigger than it is today. So indeed, Denzel has enjoyed such successes in his films, and to 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 even have him say he's regretted not taking this, you wonder, because he's done such incredible, such amazing films. But for filmmakers or for actors who have been in the industry for long, when they see some of these things, they alone can tell you that this could have been so good for their career had they pursued it. So I can understand. I'm not in the shoes, so I cannot understand it perfectly, but I very much believe that that would have really bolstered his career much more. So in the year 1995, perhaps around the same year that this film was released, he had done or about three films of his was released then, and these films was Crimson Tide, Virtuosity, and Devil in a Blue Dress, which were also good. I mean, critically, it was also a hit in a way, critically, but David Fincher's film became such a phenomenon, and I'm sure if I'm sure he wouldn't want to change anything about his career now. But if he had the opportunity to go back in time, he would prefer to do the David Fincher film than perhaps any of these three, which are good films in its own right. Are good films in its own right. So yes, these are there are times that filmmakers or I would say actors or filmmakers in general may not make the right choices, not because the choices they are making is bad, but if they had made certain choices, that would have been better. An example is Will Smith um, making choosing to do Wild Wild West instead of Matrix. But he also said clearly that he thought that that role wasn't for him and it was perfect for Keanu Reeves. So that is cool. So it is possible for some actors to make choices that may not really pan out well, but in the long run, they come out even much better and stronger, making films that are more powerful than they would have made perhaps in time past. So whatever be the case, I'm sure Denzel would have wished he made this film, but overall he didn't, and he still had an illustrious career that we celebrate today. So indeed, it is something worth learning from as filmmakers or whatever industry you find yourself in, to be very strategic and really consider whatever choices you make so that you get the best of any deal possible. So yeah, this sums up my stories for today, for today's episode. And thank you so much for joining me for this episode of the Film Mandate, episode 52. This is how far you have come. Thank you so much for joining me once again. And I'll come your way with another story or with two more stories tomorrow in tomorrow's episode. So thank you so much, and I'll be coming your way tomorrow once again. I'm Papa Otu. See you soon.